Hello, BookTube. I'm back. I came to Vermont. This will not be a surprise to any of you that I am not in Hyde Cottage. This does not look like Hyde Cottage. I came up with Frida for the long weekend, and as soon as we got here, we went to a thrift shop, and the thrift shop had recently had a massive influx of books. So they were piled in bins instead of stacked on shelves, and they were all 25 cents. Every single one was 25 cents. And you know all those things that I've been saying on this channel for months now ad nauseum about how I'm trying to decrease the number of my books. I'm trying to control my intake of used books when all they do is take up space on a shelf and I get 10 books in the mail anyway for free. Well, that kind of talk just goes out the window when you see a sign that says all books 25 cents each. And I don't believe I'm the only one. I'm pretty sure that you're all the same way when you see that sign. So I lost it. A little. I lost it. I had Frida with me. She was exhausted and really hyper excited from the ride. So I didn't stay and luxuriate over these bins. But I did get a stack of books. The first of what I'm assuming is going to be many stacks of books this weekend. And I want to show them to you, just so you know what caught my eye and see what I have here. The first one is a book that needs no introduction on BookTube. This is a favorite, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. This is by Scott Lynch, and this is The Lies of Locke Namorna in one of these slightly larger mass market paperbacks. I read this when it first came out and quite liked it. Liked it quite a bit. And I am okay with reading mass market science fiction and fantasy. I'm not all that big a fan of this format anymore. I kind of like trade paperbacks and hardcovers better. And I'm not sure if that's because they are genuinely more comfortable, or it's just, propinquity. That's what I'm getting sent. So that's what I'm doing most of my reading, so maybe I'm acclimating to that. But one way or another, as soon as I saw this on the stack of, one of those bins, I realized that I currently don't have a copy. I tend to give it away to people. And it was 25 cents each. Did I mention that? So I grabbed this next one is David Brin. He did Startide Rising, which we saw in my library tour. The Mordor library tour. I saw a couple of mass market paperbacks of Startide Rising, which in my opinion is one of the greatest science fiction novels ever written, even though it's out of print because the genre doesn't care about its forebears. And in response to a lot of comments that I got about that, a lot of you were asking, well, didn't David Brin write lots of other stuff? Because I mentioned that probably the intersection that most normal people have with him, not book people, would be that he wrote the novel on which the Kevin Costner flop of a movie, The Postman, was based. I think that The Postman is a wonderful movie, and I think it's a pretty good book, too. But several of you were asking, and David Brin, in addition to his Startide Rising and Sundiver, which came right before it, he wrote a bunch of other books set in that universe, the universe of Uplift, where older and more advanced species genetically, mentally, and technologically uplift lower species as clients to themselves. And having a client species, or more than one, is sort of an entry card to this advanced society. And humans have uplifted in this universe that Brin created. Humans have uplifted, of course, the higher primates, chimpanzees and gorillas, but also dolphins as well. And this is the first book in the Uplift trilogy, the actual Uplift trilogy. And again, as soon as I saw it, I realized I wouldn't have any objection to reading this in mass market paperback. So I got it, and that was the 25 cents a piece talking, because one of my foremost rules in the 21st century for slowing down the acquisition of books, used books, is that you only buy books in series if you are presented with the whole series. So you don't get volume 1 or volume 2 or volume 3 if none of the other volumes are there. And I ignored that piece of advice, so I got this. This is Brightness Reads. This is the first book in the Uplift trilogy, even though there were no other Uplift books there. And the same thing with this third one. This is The Girl Who Heard Dragons by Anne McCaffrey. And I remember it being one of the later Pern novels that I really liked. And I also like the fact that this is illustrated, a mass market paperback that's illustrated. It's Michael Whelan illustrations, and they're all throughout here. There are spot illustrations and full-page illustrations. And that is, as you saw on that library tour, we saw some Dorsai books that had illustrations. But that is a comparative rarity. And I don't like it. I don't like that it should be. I think if there's any kind of genre that deserves its mass market paperbacks to be illustrated, it's science fiction and fantasy. And so, I read this when it first came out. This was in the early 90s, 1994, and I liked it. I jotted it down in my book journal. Wasn't in 1994. I wasn't reviewing books, wasn't talking about them with anybody except people who came to my information desk, and that was it. Never really thought about it after that. But I saw it today in a fine condition mass market paperback for basically no money, and I'm perfectly happy to reread it. I'm planning in 2020 on some loving, detailed rereads of a lot of classics of science fiction and fantasy. And the Dragon Riders of Pern, the first 3 Dragon Riders of Pern books by Anne McCaffrey are one of those. But she kept going after that. In fact, the 4th Pern book, the one right after White Dragon, Moreta, is a very good Pern novel. I almost want to call it the 4th book in the original Dune series, or Pern series, except that it's not really. I mean, the Dragon Quest and White Dragon sort of conclude a storyline. So, but it was 25 cents. Did I mention that? So that's why I grabbed it. And then this next one is a made-up story. It's contemporary fiction. It's a UK trade paperback, and that was probably what sealed the deal. It was also $25, and it's also an author, or 25 cents. And it's an author that I have been meaning to reread. He's one of these mid-20th century authors. Penelope Lively's name came up recently. She's another one. Anita Brookner is another one. These Penelope Fitzgerald and a couple of other authors are people that they just had careers during the 20th century, and the 21st century has not seen their like. The literary landscape has largely changed. The economics of the literary landscape have made those kind of careers harder to sustain than ever. Most of these people, once they realize that they're going to make so little money, they can't live on it anymore. Rents are astronomical. They're not going to be paid a living wage to be a third-rate, mid-list author by their publisher. Instead, they're going to be dumped. So they have to get jobs. They have to be in academia or something like that. And it tends to decrease their books, both in quantity and in quality. So I'm starting to turn towards that whole demographic of authors from the mid-20th century, because I'm starting to realize that they may have been the last of their kind. And this is William Boyd. This is his Waiting for Sunrise, which I've never read. And I think he's one of those authors. I think this is an author who never really had a huge breakout book on his own. A couple connected with movies, maybe a little. But other than that, he just kept plugging away. He just kept writing novels. I'd love to know, I mean, who are those people in the 21st century? And unlike Boyd, these authors in the mid-20th century, like Anthony Burgess before Clockwork Orange, or, oh God, there are a million of them. Peter Davison, for instance, or a bunch of others. They could scrape together a kind of author's living. They often had to go elsewhere. They often had to be expats. But their publishers would just keep paying them a modest amount. And the reason that was livable is because everything else in the world cost a modest amount. And that's not true anymore. So I'm just wondering. It's not a sociological reason, not the only reason that I got the book. I'm also curious. I'm interested. Every time I've read a William Boyd novel, I've liked it. And then this next one, I've mentioned before that I love Penguin Classics, and I get rid of them, which those two things don't seem to go together, but nevertheless, if somebody comes to me and really wants a copy of a book, if they email me, because for instance I give my email on this channel all the time, and I don't need to, because if you Google me, it's the first thing that comes up. Literally the first thing that comes up is my email. And the second thing that comes up is that I was a prize-winning jockey in the Victorian era. And if somebody says to me, I just heard you mentioning The Three Musketeers or Oblomov or something like that, and it sounds really good, but I don't have a copy and I'm far away from a bookstore. Could you send me a copy? Well, then I'm going to do that. And if my Penguin Classic is the only copy that I have of that book, I'm going to pack it up and send it, trusting that I will find it elsewhere. And so I saw this thing at the bookstore for 25 cents. It's in perfect condition. And I don't think I have a copy. And it's the Rosemary Edmonds translation of Anna Karenina with this great cover. There's a later Penguin translation. I think it's Pevier and Volkonsky, with an Anna Karenina on the cover that I don't picture the main character of this book is looking anything like it. So I saw this in perfect condition. It was 25 cents. I'm sure I would have grabbed it anyway, because I'm pretty sure that I have given away all my copies of Anna Karenina, so now I have one. And then this last one was a bit of an extravagance. I mean, these things are all 25 cents, so none of them were financial extravagances, but this is a hardcover. And hardcovers seem, they're a little bit bulkier, a little bit heavier, so But this is something I don't think I've ever seen before. This is The Sword and Stone by T.H. White, which of course I have seen, I have read, I have taught. But this is an illustrated version. This is illustrated by somebody named Dennis Nolan. I really don't like the vibe of the cover, but we'll ignore that. This is not just one or two. It's suffused with illustrations. There are full-color illustrations all throughout this thing. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with it, this is the first chapter of The Once and Future King by T.H. White, which is, in my opinion, one of the greatest fantasy novels of the 20th century. One of the only ones that can actually stand toe-to-toe with The Lord of the Rings as a novel. And that I think is much wiser than Lord of the Rings. I don't know off the top of my head of a 20th century novel of any genre that is wiser than this book. But you won't get the wisdom in the first chapter. The first chapter is very much a boy's adventure of Merlin, the magician, who can talk to animals and has talking animals as friends, transforming the little boy Wart, who is going to grow up to be King Arthur, into a number of animals in order to teach him about the world and about being human. And that's a great story. It's an absolutely fantastic story. I understand perfectly well why it caught on so well. The Sword in the Stone actually caught on more than the book of which it is a part. You get Wart's adventures transforming into all kinds of animals, and you already know, if you know anything about Arthurian mythology, you already know how the story's going to end, right? It's right there in the title. There's a sword stuck through an anvil into a rock, and it is emblazoned with a legend that says whoever pulls this sword from the stone is Rightwise King of England. And Wart is nobody. He's the page to a knight who thinks very little of him. No one thinks anything of him except Merlin. And we already know how the story is going to end. So I understand why this caught on. But I don't think I've ever had an illustrated edition of this. And that might be fun. This might be fun to read it again in this format. I don't know if it will. I'll have to try it and see. This is part of what I'm thinking of doing for 2020, where I go at these fantasy and science fiction classics and just re-examine them. So since this was, as I've mentioned now, ad nauseum, 25 cents, I grabbed it. So that was the first mail haul of my long weekend, where I no sooner got here, I was bristling with self-control and with all sorts of resolutions, and I no sooner got here than they went out the window. So we have an illustrated Sword in the Stone. We have the Rosemary Edmonds Anna Karenina, which in my opinion is the best English language translation. We have Waiting for Sunrise by William Boyd. If any of you have read this or are, for instance, William Boyd fans, please let me know. Tell me what you think of this thing and what I'm getting into. And then 3 science fiction and fantasy mass markets. We have The Girl Who Heard Dragons by Anne McCaffrey with illustrations by Michael Whelan all throughout, not just the cover. We have Brightness Reef, which is the first book in the Uplift trilogy, and which I'm going to reread and then get rid of if on this weekend I don't find the other 2 volumes in this trilogy. I am not going to hold on to volume 1 and wait around for 10 years hoping I'll find the others. So either I find the others, or I find cheap hardcovers of the trilogy, or I find a 1-volume collection if there's ever been one. But otherwise, this is very temporary. And finally, The Lies of Locke Lamora, which I remember I really liked it when it first came out, so I will gladly read it again. I don't have a copy, and now I do. And, look at that. That's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't have my iPhone on me, and I don't have pen and paper, so I have no idea how much 6 times 25 is, but you can tell that it isn't a lot. So this video is a record of my first defeat here in the Great White North. I no sooner got here than my resolution not to buy books disappeared. So you can probably expect more of these videos. But I'm going to wrap this one up for now, and I will be back. Thank you, Book